Hi, and welcome to our third virtual field trip. Today, Bar T, in partnership with Mountainside Education and Enrichment, is bringing you critters and creeks. My name is Shannon. I run the outdoor and environmental education here at Mountainside, and I'm here with one of our educators, Alyssa. Alyssa, what is our focus today?
So we're going to learn about the watershed that we all live in, and then we're going to spend some time down at the creek seeing what we can find, and then learning about what we find in the creek and what that tells us about the ecosystem. But first, I think we should head up to the classroom so we can get some background knowledge.
Let's go. I know that a watershed is this land of area where all the water drains to one body of water. What watershed do we live in?
We live in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So everything you see on this map that's in blue drains into the Chesapeake Bay that many of you probably have visited before. So our Chesapeake Bay watershed includes 6 states. If you want, you can pause the video and take a moment to see if you can identify what 6 states are on the map here. Our northernmost point of the Chesapeake Bay watershed is all the way up in Cooperstown, New York. Thank you, Shannon. And then our very most southern point is all the way down in Norfolk, Virginia. Our watershed covers 64,000 square miles of land. There's a lot of streams and rivers that flow into our Chesapeake Bay watershed, and it's home to over 18 million people, including you and me. An indicator species is a species that provides information on the overall condition of an ecosystem. So whether that animal or plant is doing well or not so well, that tells us if there's any changes in environmental conditions, whether they're good or bad. There are 2 main indicator species in the Chesapeake Bay, our oysters and our blue crabs. And today when we're in the creek, our indicator species are going to be our macroinvertebrates. So what are aquatic macroinvertebrates? Those are pretty big words, and if you don't know what they mean, it might be a little confusing. So we can break it down. Aquatic means anything living or growing in water. Macro means anything that's big enough to see with your eye. So we're not going to need a microscope or a magnifying glass to see our macroinvertebrates today. And lastly, an invertebrate is an animal that doesn't have a backbone. If you take your hand and kind of run it up and down your back, you'll feel your spine or your backbone. Our macroinvertebrates do not have a backbone. A couple more facts about our macroinvertebrates. They play a really important role in our food chain. They're down at the very bottom of the food chain because they're a source of food for a lot of things that live within our creek. Number 1 being fish. Our minnows specifically love to eat our macroinvertebrates. Our macroinvertebrates live under rocks and in leaf packs. You'll see that when we head down to the creek. And those leaf packs also serve as their source of food along with any algae that might be growing in the stream. An important thing to remember before we head down there today is that our macroinvertebrates cannot and will not hurt us. Most of them are very small and very fragile. They're not any bigger than the nail on my pinky finger, so we need to handle them with care today.
What's wonderful is we will be able to observe them, and we'll be able to take a nice close look in their natural habitat through catching and releasing them.
Let's talk creek safety. Always bring an adult when exploring a creek. Always have boots or old shoes on. We don't know what's at the bottom of the creek. And be gentle with all living things. Leave the creek and all of its inhabitants better than you found them.
The part of the creek that I'm standing in right now is one of the best places to look for macroinvertebrates. As you can see, the water's pretty shallow. It doesn't even reach my ankles here. And there's lots of rocks and it's really slow moving. We call this part of the creek a riffle.
So I know we're looking for macros at the creek. Where should I look? Where can I find them?
So one of the first places that I always like to check when I come down to the creek is packs of leaves, because macroinvertebrates love to eat the leaves that fall from the trees into the stream as they kind of break down and decompose. So if you're ever down at the creek, if you find a nice pack of leaves, you can just take it right out of the creek and then slowly kind of take each leaf apart, see if there's anything wiggling around in there. It might take some time. Might be a lot of leaves in here. You kind of want to just see if there's anyone calling this leaf pack home.
As Alyssa and I were looking through the leaf pack, we found this macroinvertebrate. It's a crane fly. Crane flies are moderately sensitive. You usually find them in leaf packs. This is a relatively large crane fly. Crane flies are neat because they can retract. They are big worm-like looking macro that are somewhat translucent. You can kind of see their insides.
Like I said earlier, we want to pick our rocks up very gently and then slowly flip them over, and then take a minute to see if there's anything wiggling around on our rock. I don't see anything wiggling, but you may have already spotted this clump of eggs at the bottom of the rock. Those are fish eggs. We also have this tiny little cluster of rocks up here. You'll notice it's not any bigger than my pinky nail. This is a home to what we call a caddisfly. Our caddisflies don't have any form of protection, so they build themselves tiny little houses of rocks and sticks and glue them together on the bottom of rocks to keep themselves safe. Here we have a caddisfly who has come out of the home he's made for himself. His home moves with him so that he's able to move from rock to rock within the stream. Earlier I said that most of our macroinvertebrates aren't any bigger than the pinky nail on our pinky finger, but here's an exception. We have right here a mayfly macroinvertebrate. We can tell it's a mayfly because he has 3 big tails at the end that make the letter M for mayfly. He's probably about ready to hatch into a mayfly that we would see flying around above water. So I have 3 stoneflies here in this little lid. As you can see, they're all different sizes. We have one right here that's almost a little bit longer than my pinky nail. We have another one over here that's a little bit smaller than him. And then we have this little teeny one right here who barely is the length of my pinky nail. So they're all the same species. Some are just a little bigger than others, which means they've hatched earlier than the other ones did.
Alyssa, I found this. Is this a lobster?
Well, it looks like a lobster, but this is actually a crayfish. They live under the rocks in our creek, and they also like to dig little burrows in the mud. They are a macroinvertebrate, though they look a lot different than the macroinvertebrates we've been finding today. You can see all of those nice little legs. They've got 2 pinchers at the front to help them grab things and maybe to protect themselves from other crayfish that might want to fight them for a nice rock to hide under.
I noticed that it also only moves backwards.
That's kind of a defense mechanism. So if he were in the water, he'd be able to shoot straight back away from you and swim away.
Talk about macros as an indicator species because sensitive macroinvertebrates need clean water. Tolerant macroinvertebrates can live in clean and polluted water. So if you think about yourselves in your bedroom, some of you need to have a clean space. Your laundry needs to be put away, your toys and books need to be organized in order for you to feel comfortable. You would be considered a sensitive macro. Others of us are okay with laundry being on the floor and our toys not being put away. You would be a more tolerant macroinvertebrate. Here, Alyssa and I have both the most sensitive and the most tolerant macroinvertebrate.
So I have right here a stonefly. I can tell it's a stonefly because it has 2 tails versus our mayflies that have 3 tails. Our stonefly is the most sensitive, as Shannon mentioned, so if we're finding these in our creek, that means our water is pretty clean.
I have a leech, and our leech is a most tolerant macroinvertebrate. I know it is a leech because I can move the back, and you can still see it has suctioned itself to this rock.
Again, aquatic macroinvertebrates are reliable indicators of water quality because some macroinvertebrates are more sensitive and others are more tolerant. It is important to remember if you are exploring a creek and you're only finding tolerant macroinvertebrates, that's telling you that the water is probably polluted. If you are finding sensitive macroinvertebrates and tolerant macroinvertebrates, it's probably clean and healthy water with minimal pollution because tolerant can live in both.
So here we have a baby salamander that I found in the creek. I can tell that it's a baby because if you look at the side of his head, you'll see kind of some feathery, wispy things coming off the side. Those are his gills. When salamanders are young, they live in the water and they can't breathe air like we do. So once he's older, he'll grow a set of lungs and be able to breathe above the water. We found lots of salamanders when we were down at the creek, so that means our creek has a good level of biodiversity. Biodiversity is a variety of life in an ecosystem, we'll show you some pictures and videos of all the things we found living here today. We have a really great example of the biodiversity we have here at Mountainside in this little pond right here. So each of these strands, kind of curly Q shoelace looking things, are strands of American toad eggs. So each of those little black dots in this strand is actually a baby toad. We've had some that have already hatched and have started swimming around as little tadpoles here in this pond. They'll spend some more time in the water until they are fully grown into toads when they are ready to leave the water.
We've been down at the creek for an hour now, collecting and observing a variety of macroinvertebrates. The majority of what we have found has been sensitive and moderately sensitive, which indicates that our water quality is above average with minimal pollution.
Like you mentioned, we found all those wonderful macroinvertebrates down here. We've seen salamanders, fish eggs, frog eggs, even some tadpoles, and tracks from different animals down here as well. So that tells us that there's lots of things not only living in our creek, but using the creek, and that our biodiversity here at Mountainside is pretty high.
Let's head back to the classroom to finish up with a few fun facts about our watershed. We all live in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Here are some fun facts about our watershed. There are more than 100,000 streams, creeks, and rivers that flow throughout it. The bay itself holds about 18 trillion gallons of water, and that equals 55 billion bathtubs filled all the way to the top. And the bay supports more than 3,600 species, 2,700 being plants, 900 being animals.
To review, biodiversity is the different types of life within an ecosystem. Here are a few pictures of the variety of life we found today at Mountainside. Take a few moments to pause the video and see if you can correctly match the pictures with the words in the box on the right. Let's see how you did. Here are all the pictures matched up with the correct answers. How many were you able to get right?
Let's review our terms. Watershed, an area of land that drains to one body of water. Indicator species, a species that provides information on the overall condition of an ecosystem. Macroinvertebrate, organisms without backbones, which are visible to the eye without the aid of a microscope. Biodiversity, the variety of life found on Earth or in a particular ecosystem. Lastly, a riffle is the part of a creek where you want to turn over rocks to look for macros.
We hope you had fun following along with us and use this new perspective the next time you explore a creek.